Good afternoon. Thank you for coming to John Grisham Presents The Innocent Man, brought to you by Criminal Justice Reform Month and the law firm Goodwin Procter. Criminal Justice Reform Month is a collaborative project of Georgetown Law's student organizations founded in 2004 by the Georgetown Law Innocence Project. Through a series of educational and social programs, Criminal Justice Reform Month aims to educate law students about the criminal justice system from the diverse perspectives of our numerous student organizations. It is our hope that these programs will encourage law students to pursue reform-minded solutions to these challenges in their legal careers and will bolster a community for those interested in criminal justice issues. We are proud to have this year's Criminal Justice Reform Month and this afternoon's event sponsored by Goodwin Procter, LLP. Goodwin Procter has a long and significant history with the Innocence Project, and most specifically with the New England Innocence Project. The New England Innocence Project is a member of the Innocence Network and provides pro bono legal assistance to inmates who are challenging their wrongful convictions. NEIP is very unique in that it was the first Innocence Project to be coordinated by a law firm. Goodwin Procter houses the New England Innocence Project in its offices, and NEIP is coordinated on a pro bono basis by attorneys and paralegals from Goodwin's Boston office. Since August 2003, over 137 Goodwin attorneys, summer associates, and staff have dedicated almost 20,000 hours to the project. We have a number of Goodwin attorneys and representatives here with us tonight, and we would like to thank them for making this possible. John Grisham grew up in Mississippi, where he played quarterback on his high school football team. He received a Bachelor's of Science from Mississippi State and went on to earn a JD from the University of Mississippi. After graduation, Grisham joined a small general practice firm and spent a great deal of time in the courtroom handling both criminal and civil litigation. In 1984, Grisham wrote his first novel, A Time to Kill, inspired by a recent rape trial featuring the testimony of the 10-year-old victim. After the publication of this novel, Grisham went on to become a prolific writer. To date, he has sold over 60 million books and has written 7 best-selling novels, including The Pelican Brief, the movie version of which was filmed in this law center's library. In 2006, Grisham tackled nonfiction for the first time with The Innocent Man. This book tells the story of a small-town baseball star, Ron Williamson, and his wrongful conviction for the rape and murder of a young woman. Grisham follows Williamson through his trial, incarceration, and eventual exoneration with the help of the Innocence Project's Barry Scheck. The Innocent Man shows the destruction of life that occurs after a wrongful conviction and shows it is not an isolated incident in our criminal justice system. It is my pleasure to introduce a man who has brought the plight of the wrongfully convicted into the minds of the average reader, Mr. John Grisham.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a privilege to be back here at Georgetown Law School. I can almost remember my last visit. I think it was in 1981. The firm was published in March of 91, and the next book was going to be The Pelican Brief, and so I had to do some research in Washington, various spots around town. I sneaked into this law school back then to take a few pictures and take notes, and of course I had to put, that's what I put in the book. I don't recall what I wrote about it. I hope it was nice, but it was a long time ago. A lot of books have been written since then. And I remember we came to D.C. in the summer of '93 when they were filming the movie, and they were at the Hoover Building. And when I was writing the book, I called the FBI and started asking them questions about the Hoover Building. And they didn't know who I was, and I didn't know who they were, but I got nowhere. I just got stonewalled, and I couldn't get inside the Hoover Building, and because it was, it's all top secret. They can't let writers know about these things before the internet. And when I came back later, they were filming a movie there. They had movie sets all up, and I walked around like, some kind of a big shot. And the book really took some cheap shots at FBI agents, which I've done from time to time, and I thought I might, be greeted hostily, but they were all, when you're there with Julia Roberts, everything changes. And everybody loves you at that point, Denzel and all those. We usually go to each movie set one time to meet everybody, to have lunch, and then go back home, because there's nothing more tedious than watching a movie being filmed, and I don't make movies. What I'm probably going to do today is just kind of ramble for a little bit and maybe tell some stories, talk about the innocent man, and then we have Q&A, Rachel, when it's over, and I really prefer the Q&A because it takes the pressure off of me to prepare remarks, but it also kind of gets you in the middle of it, and I know what you want to talk about. For those of you who've read The Firm, and I guess now The Associate, it may come as a shock to learn that I was not heavily recruited out of law school. Nobody offered me a job, not that I had gone looking for jobs, because I always knew I was going to go back to my small town, get involved in law and politics. And that's exactly what I did. I went back to my hometown in Mississippi and found a little small space to rent. I actually went down and visited a sign painter and picked out the sign that said Law Offices, John Grisham, Jr., and I hung that, hung out my shingle, as they like to say, and kind of declared myself ready to sue, looking for clients. I felt like the new gunslinger in town, but didn't have a whole lot of ammunition, and I sure didn't have any clients. I almost starved to death. Back in those days in our small county, we didn't have a public defender system as such. We had a system, and it was for all of the court-appointed indigent cases. The judges would assign them to the various lawyers around town. And there was an unwritten rule because the older lawyers had taken the cases when they were fresh out of law school, then the rookies were expected to do it, and we just said everything worked fine. Nobody went unrepresented. And if you wanted trial work, if you wanted to get your hands dirty, you could sign up, you could volunteer. And that's what I wanted. I wanted clients, I wanted to stay busy, and I really wanted the trial work. And so I had a lot of cases, a lot of tough court-appointed criminal cases. 6 months after I finished law school, I tried my first murder case alone. Had no idea what I was doing, but got through it. And I tried bank robberies, and I tried rapes, and I tried all kinds of cases, and most of my clients went to prison because that's where they belonged. I pled a lot of them. I helped them get there as fast as I could. I had a few acquittals, but I learned the system, and I did a lot of criminal law for 10 years. Even in a small town in Mississippi, I never thought about a wrongful conviction. I handled dozens of cases. I don't have any cases. I never saw a cop hide evidence, create evidence. I never saw a cop verbally extract a false confession. I never saw a prosecutor fail to give evidence he's supposed to give. There was a snitch one time, a jailhouse snitch I brought over in one of my trials to testify against my client. And by then I'd been trying cases for 5 or 6 years. I've never had so much fun during cross-examination of a jailhouse snitch. He was totally exposed, made a liar out of him. The jurors laughed at him. And in my closing argument, I used the jailhouse snitch as an example of how desperate the state was. And I got an acquittal. We didn't worry about jailhouse snitches because you can take care of them on cross-examination. I never saw a case involving junk science that convicted somebody. I never thought about wrongful convictions. I practiced law for 10 years, lots of criminal cases. I never thought that one of my clients got mistreated. And I think that's the way it is in most of our jurisdictions. I still believe that. The question I get most as a writer is, where do you get your ideas? Where do they come from? And I'll tell you about one of them. December the 9th, 2004, I was flipping through the New York Times, as I do every morning, usually in a hurry. In December, I'm not looking for ideas. I finish a book every year by Thanksgiving, and I don't really do a whole lot of work during the holidays. I sure don't spend time trolling for ideas for novels. And I love obituaries. Small town obituaries because they print the entire name, and some of the names are great. Plus, the person's dead, so I can use the name without being sued. I have a real problem with lawsuits. Kind of a way of life. I love obituaries in big newspapers, especially the Times, because they tell these wonderful little biographies about people, oftentimes folks I've never heard of. Anyway, I always love to read the obituaries. And the lead obituary on this day, there was a picture of a man my age standing in a courtroom in a small town in Oklahoma. And the headline read, "Ron Williamson, freed from death row, dies at 51. And there was a picture of Ron in an ill-fitting shirt, tie, jacket, his hair bleached to white, turned white, not bleached, but gray, looking kind of confused, somewhat happy, I guess, standing in the same courtroom where he'd been convicted 12 years earlier. The first paragraph of his obituary read as follows. Ronald Keith Williamson, who left his small town in Oklahoma with dreams of major league glory, but was later sent to death row and came within 5 days of being executed for a murder he did not commit, died last Saturday in a nursing home in Tulsa. He was 51. The cause was cirrhosis of the liver. That's the first paragraph. I spent a lot of time trying to create opening scenes, opening paragraphs that will hook you, the reader, into a story. And I was hooked from the first paragraph of Ron's obituary. I read the rest of it. It told of his baseball career as a small-town sports hero, second-round draft pick of the Oakland A's in 1972, mental illness, framed for a murder, an unsolved murder in his hometown, sent to prison, given his death warrant, told he had 5 days to live, exoneration, the eventual conviction of the real killer, who was the last person seen alive with the victim. All of that was in one obituary. And I said, this is a story. This is my next book. I went to the phone and I called New York and I'd call my publisher and I said, have you read the Times? Well, every serious New Yorker has read the Times. And he said, sure. And I said, well, have you read the obituaries? Well, no. I said, read the obituaries and call me back in 5 minutes. And the phone rang and he said, wow, this is a great story. This has got you written all over it. I said, it does. I took off to Oklahoma. Ron did not leave a wife or children that we know of, but he left two sisters, one in Tulsa and one in Dallas. And I went to see him, and I convinced him to let me write his story. So for a year, I'm not trained as a journalist. I'm not, I don't want to be. I don't want to. It's too much hard work. You got to take notes and use tape recorders, and you got to do research, and you got to be accurate. And I'm just not known for my accuracy. I really don't like to get pinned down on stuff. Okay, I'll change a street or whatever just to keep from having to go look up something. Mark Twain one time said he moved an entire state and no one knew the difference. So, that's what writers do. You create. You have all this liberty to move things around. I just don't like to get pinned down with facts. But I knew I had to be accurate because I knew when I started the project that the people responsible for Ron's conviction not only still alive, they're still in office. And I knew that they would not be pleased when the book came out. One person I didn't meet was Ron's defense lawyer. It was a court-appointed case. Ron was broke, and his lawyer, Barney Ward, was legally blind. I don't mean legally blind, I mean very blind. I mean blind with the big black glasses, he can't see anything. You can be legally blind and still see a lot. This guy could not see anything. And he was Ron's lawyer. And Barney at one time was a pretty good courtroom brawler. There was a tradition in Ada when they were trying a case and there was an exhibit, Barney would stand up and say, "Let me see that." The judge said, "Okay, we'll take a recess." Barney would step outside with his secretary, who would look at the photograph or the document or whatever and describe it in detail to Barney. And he had a great recall. He'd go back in, he could do a passable job, cross-examination, or whatever he needed it for. There was no second chair. There was no expert. It was just Barney representing Ron. I met Ron Williamson's high school baseball coach. In this part of Oklahoma, as many of you may remember, in the late 50s and 1960s, Mickey Mantle was a godlike figure all over the country. He was certainly the most famous baseball player in America. He was from Oklahoma, and in Oklahoma he was more than a god. He was, everybody worshipped Mickey. And in this small area, small part of Oklahoma, many people thought Ron Williamson was the next Mickey Mantle. Ron certainly thought so. He had a big ego and a big game and a great athlete. I played baseball in high school and some in college, and my name was never mentioned when they drafted players. Ron was a second-round draft pick of the Oakland A's in 1972, signed a bonus, most of which he lost in a poker game. He went off to the minor leagues, and he had potential. Obviously, he had a big arm and a big bat, and he could play the game. He was soon drinking way too much. He began showing signs of what would later be diagnosed as being bipolar. A lot of self-medication, a lot of women, a lot of hell-raising, a lot of life in the minor leagues, and it really suited Ron Williamson. He was cut out for that type of life until he crashed and burned. When he came back to Ada, about 10 years after he left, he was mentally ill. He was an alcoholic. He was washed up. He couldn't work. He sat on his mother's porch and played his guitar, and he had long hair, and this is the mid-1970s, late 70s, and early 80s, and he was kind of a joke. And the town was kind of ashamed of Ron Williamson. And he was weird. He liked to fight, liked to go to bars, liked to roam the streets at night playing his guitar, and he was just kind of a weirdo. There was a murder of a young cocktail waitress the cops could not solve, even though the murderer was someone they knew very well. A man with a history of sexual assault, a man with a history of violence, a man last seen with the victim, a man the victim knew well, but the cops, for some reason that I don't think we'll ever know, chose not to pursue the real killer. And after 5 years, the pressure to solve this crime was intense, and they decided to pin it on someone. Two men, really. Ron Williamson and his sidekick, Dennis Fritz, were buddies, and they were both well known around town. Dennis Fritz, by the way, will be here Thursday, right? On this stage? This coming Thursday, there's a program involving several exonerees. Dennis Fritz will be one of them, and he's a great guy to listen to. Marvin Anderson is another one. Marvin served 15 years in Virginia. We've done several programs together. But it's a wonderful event if you guys have time to stop by. 12:30, Rachel, on Thursday. I wish I could come back and just spend time with Dennis, a man who served 11 years in prison. During Ron's trial, when he was arrested, they didn't really have any evidence to get an arrest warrant, but they had doctored some fingerprints, convinced the judge to issue the warrant. Once they got Ron in jail, that's when they started building the case against him. They used snitches. They would literally, Ron would be in his cell, and a new snitch would come in one day, and they'd be the cell's about the size of this podium, okay, basically on top of each other. And the snitch would start talking about the case, the murder, what happened. This is what he heard down the cell block, and they would talk about it. And Ron knew exactly what was going on, so he wouldn't say anything. The same thing at Dennis. They'd put a snitch in with Dennis. And sometimes the snitch would pop out a couple of days later and say, okay, I heard it. He confessed. I'll testify. He confessed the entire crime to me, and that's the way snitches go. The cops would hang around the cell. I mean, this is a tiny jail, so the cops knew all all the guys in the cells, and the cops would say, well, you know, late at night, you know, why don't you tell us what really happened? If you'll come clean now, just trust me, we can probably save your life. We can probably keep you off of death row if you'll just tell us what happened. This went on for months and months, and finally they built up enough evidence. This was their body of work. This was their shrewd police work. They took the case to trial. Ron was heavily medicated when he was in prison, or when he was in jail. They would juice him pretty good to knock him out at night because he would scream nonstop. When they took him to trial, they'd give him a different pill that kind of made him real edgy. In fact, he was a frightening person. He was so scary that the jurors, after they convicted him and gave him death for many years, kept in touch with each other, afraid that he was going to get out because he was unmedicated in the courtroom. He knocked over tables. He would scream at witnesses, "Stop the lying! Stop lying about me! I'll get you!" That doesn't really set too well with jurors. The jury convicted him quickly. He was given a death sentence, which in Oklahoma is pretty easy to get. In a lot of states, they're pretty easy to get. And Ron was sent to McAllister Prison in Oklahoma to await his date with the execution chamber. When he got to death row, he made one friend. The guy across the hallway, and you can, from Ron's cell, and I've been in both the cells, you can see one other cell, the one directly across the hall. And directly across from Ron was a guy named Greg Wilhoit. Greg served 4 years before he was exonerated. He was wrongfully convicted of killing his wife. He'd been there 2 years when Ron showed up. They started talking about their cases, and they both claimed to be innocent, which is not unusual on death row. They began to believe each other. Greg read Ron's transcript. Every inmate on death row has his transcript, and it's sacred property. The guards can't touch it. You have a little legal file, legal stack with all your records, and they can pass those back and forth under the rules of most prisons. Greg read Ron's transcript and was astounded at the trial, at the farce, at how he'd been convicted. Greg came to believe that Ron was innocent, and Ron the same for Greg. And between the two of them, they started this unbelievable friendship. Each week, the little library cart would be rolled down death row, and they had, a few dozen old worn-out paperbacks. And Ron and Greg would take 2 or 3, and they would read the books and then pass them back and forth, and they read everything they could find. They read Faulkner and Hemingway and all the classics. They loved Stephen King. There's no evidence they read any Grisham novels when they were there. Kept waiting for some evidence so that they liked my books, but they never said that. Greg, who now lives in California, said they would have these long discussions, these long feuds over The Great Gatsby, or what was Faulkner thinking when he wrote The Sound and the Fury. Not your typical conversations on death row, but Greg told me many times, he said, the books got us through it. The books pulled us through. Ron, right off the bat, began showing signs of all types of deterioration mentally. The first year he lost 100 pounds. He was about 6'2", weighed about 200 pounds, 220 when he went in. Within a year he was just emaciated. His hair turned white almost as soon as he got there. He could scream for hours. He would just scream and wail nonstop, protesting that he was innocent. He was innocent. I am innocent. I am innocent. I am innocent. He could do it for hours until he became so hoarse he couldn't go on. So they kept him medicated quite often. Greg was exonerated and left him, and they thought they would never see each other again. Ron was convinced that his date was coming up. After he'd been there for 7 years, they came and got him one day, the big guards, and they put him in a truck, and they took him over to the warden's office, and they had this little thing they do in Oklahoma to make things as dramatic as possible. Walked him into a room with the warden, and the warden said, "Okay, I need to read you your death notice or your death warrant or whatever, you'll die in 30 days. We regret to inform you that we'll have to kill you in 30 days. And we have to go through, these are the rules, these are the people who can come see you, they have to be on the list, all these, just everything, trying to make it as difficult as possible. One question through Ron, they said, what do you want us to do with your body? And Ron said, I really don't care. I mean, I'd never really thought about it. It won't really make any difference, will it? They said, oh, no, you've got to tell us what to do with your body once we kill you. And Ron said, I don't know. I don't know. Just send me to my sister, and she'll know what to do with me once you guys kill me. They took him back to death row. They put him in the holding cell, which is another cell, just like the cell he was in, but it has different rules. Ron started counting the days and acting crazier, and so they juiced up the medication. At the time, his habeas petition was in the Eastern District of Oklahoma. Judge Frank C. had the case, and Judge Frank C. really didn't have much patience with habeas work because every federal judge is inundated, especially in the death states, the active death states. And so Judge C. assigned this case to one of his law clerks one night. She took the brief home, the petition home, and she read it late one night. And she read it again, she read it again, she read it again, and she couldn't go to sleep. She knew something wasn't right. The next morning, she took the petition into the office, and she got the other clerks. She said, you got to read this. I want you all to read it. They all read it. They all stopped what they were doing, and they read Ron's habeas petition. Once they were all convinced, they sort of had an intervention with Judge C. They all walked in his room, shut the door, and sort of confronted Judge C. and said, you got to read this. You got to stop the execution because this man did not receive a fair trial. And Judge C. did that, and with 5 days to go, the execution was stopped. I had lunch with Judge C. in Oklahoma, and I said, what would have happened? A lot of times in habeas work, it's kind of a game of brinksmanship. The defense lawyers will wait till almost the last moment to file something, to make the judge react at the last moment to stop the execution. Most of the time it works, but sometimes it doesn't. The judge doesn't stop it. And there was some of this going on with Ron's lawyers. But Judge C. said, no, in Oklahoma in 1994, when this happened, Ron would have been executed. They would have bounced it to the 10th Circuit in Denver, but they wouldn't have heard the case in time. He said there's no doubt in his mind as the presiding judge that Ron would have been executed. Once they got him off death row, they put him in a psych unit where he actually got some pretty good help. He found a sympathetic doctor who wanted to help him, got him some better meds, better drugs, let him see the sunshine, twice a day, important stuff like that. And Ron gradually was put back together to a point. In 1996, Dennis Fritz contacted the Innocence Project in New York. He'd heard about it through the prison grapevine. He sent his file, he sent his transcripts. And the Innocence Project in New York, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, took the case. And Barry said that the first time he heard about the case, when he heard that the police did not investigate the last man seen alive with the victim, he said, I knew at that point that's one of the first red flags. And it's basically that simple, because that man has been convicted of the killing. They took the case from 1996. It took 3 years. Fortunately, the evidence had been preserved. Ron and Dennis were both excluded. And 10 years ago, April of 1999, they had this wonderful celebration in Ada, Oklahoma, and both men walked out. Dennis Fritz is now celebrating his 10th year of freedom. Ron was not quite so lucky. Both men had great lawyers at that point. The lawyers saved their lives. The lawyers then turned around and sued half the state of Oklahoma. Cops, prosecutors, forensic scientists, crime labs, prison, a huge lawsuit. And they were able to collect some money. Most of these exonerees leave prison. When they walk out, you see them. They're smiling, they're crying, their families are crying, and everybody's thrilled after 15 years in jail, but they don't get anything. They may get a few bucks, some do not. Not all states have compensation statutes now. They never get an apology. Nobody's ever got the guts to say we're sorry. Nobody ever has got the backbone to say we made a mistake. That never happens. Dennis Fritz told me, he said, you know, if someone had just apologized to me, if the state of Oklahoma had just acknowledged that I was wrongfully convicted, I don't think I would have ever sued because I wanted it buried. In fact, just the opposite happened. The cops continued to whisper that these guys were really guilty, even while they were convicting somebody else. Ron was soon drinking again heavily, and in 5 years, he basically drank himself to death. Dennis Fritz is one of the lucky ones. He took his money, he put it in the bank. He's a smart guy. He got some help, and again, he's one of the lucky ones who have been able to survive a wrongful conviction and exoneration. I've met a lot of them over the past 2 or 3 years doing fundraisers, and there are very few success stories once they get out. At this point, I could ramble forever, or we could take questions. What would y'all like to talk about? Okay, I'll tell another story. Oh, come on. Yes, sir. Just stand up and talk. You don't need a microphone.
The habeas petition that went before, I think, the Innocence Project was on the case. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
So who became involved, or how did he end up with, other than the conversations he was having in prison, how did some of the lawyers become interested in this case or were pursuing that for him?
Well, Dennis Fritz had nothing on appeal. Dennis got, he was convicted, and he got life. One lady on the jury voted against death. And she allegedly later said, well, I just couldn't vote to kill him because I wasn't sure he was guilty. That's not unusual. That's not unusual out there in the trenches. People will vote to convict, but they've got a question about guilt, so they won't vote to kill him. They give him life instead. They don't even try to understand it, okay? So Dennis, his appeals went through. In Oklahoma, you're entitled to a lawyer up to a point, I guess, through your first set of appeals. Ron was a capital case, so Ron was on death row. So he had, by law, had lawyers all the way up through his habeas work. And the main lawyer, who is still involved with Dennis, was someone who had known Ron before, volunteered for the case, got it, believed in it, and took it all the way up. Dennis was working in the prison library to get just to have something to do. He became a very good legal researcher, thought about going to law school once he got out, and he first heard of DNA testing, and Barry Scheck and the Innocence Project. Dennis made the first contact, and Barry Scheck was soon all over it. And then once Barry got involved in it, he saw Ron, Ron was obviously a co-defendant. And that's how Barry ended up with both cases. But even then, it took over 3 years from the time the Innocence Project got involved until you could finally walk them out. And then when they went to court that day, April 15th of 99, they weren't sure they were going to get out then. I mean, the emotions are unbelievable. Yes, sir. The question is fiction versus nonfiction, and when I consider doing it again, or did I consider making this a novel? Yeah. I never thought about making it a novel because honestly, I can't create stuff this good. I mean, truthfully, there's so many different layers to the book and so many unbelievable characters. There's no way I could create that. And if I did, nobody would believe it. I mean, the mail has been astonishing. From around the world. And a lot of the mail that comes from other countries, people don't believe it's nonfiction. They think I just made it up. Because they can't believe the system can break down as bad as it did on all fronts. Fiction versus nonfiction is no comparison. This book took 18 months to put together, which is not a long time for some people, but it's far too much work for me. It's just, I didn't really enjoy working that hard. I can write a novel in about 6 months, and that includes the actual writing, the revisions, which usually take about a month, and I'm done. I've even written them faster than that. I have a hard time working slow. That's a problem I have. I just don't want to. I don't want to spend a lot of time. When you write suspense, you can't get too far away from plot. Things have got to happen. The pages have got to turn. And there are times when I'd like to explore, I don't know, relationships, histories, background, setting, things like that. But you can only do so much of it in the context of a suspenseful novel because it's pure entertainment. So that's what I do, and that's what I enjoy doing. And it will be a long time before I go back to nonfiction. Now, having said that, I wasn't looking for this story. I stumbled into it one day, and that could happen again tomorrow. I mean, I could see. We have a scandal every day now. I mean, it's just wonderful. All these scandals are breaking around here. But I mean, it's just great, great material for me. But I'm not. I don't really want to get involved in the lives of other people. And when you write nonfiction, you really get into some of the worst things that people do, and then they file suit when the book's published. You get sued again. Yes, ma'am.
Do you feel like you had an obligation to tell this man's story? Was there some sort of purpose that you wanted to share with other people?
An obligation to tell the story, or some type of some purpose? No, no obligation. It all goes back to story. It all goes back to readability. It all goes back to what's a great story to tell and what's a great book to read. The purpose of the story, obviously. I told you I never thought about wrongful convictions. It just never crossed my mind. I've now been thrust into the world of it, and it keeps me awake at night. Now I think about it all the time. I'm fascinated by this aspect of our system that is so horribly broken that we can send so many innocent people to jail. I mean, we have 2 million people in prison right now. Not jail, but prison. If you throw in jail, I think 1 out of 100 Americans now behind bars. The most conservative estimates of how many are innocent, and that's very hard to gauge, is from 2 to 5%. That's a tremendous number. We sent 130 people to death row, like Ron Williamson, to be killed by the state, and they walked away exonerated because they weren't guilty. The Innocence Project now is up to 235 exonerations by DNA. 13 in Dallas County. These are people who've spent years and years in prison. When you see Dennis Fritz on, Thursday, he spent 11 years in prison and almost went crazy himself. What was your question? I'm just ranting up here. I forgot what you asked me. Oh, the purpose is this. This is what I like to do with books. I try to write 2 types of books. Both are supposed to be entertaining. One is pure entertainment. One is just old-fashioned fun, suspense, firm, Pelican Brief, Client, The Associate, books like that. The other books involve an issue, whether it's wrongful convictions, whether it's the appeal and judicial elections, whether it's the street lawyer with homelessness, the chamber with the death penalty on. I mean, there's no shortage of issues when you're talking about social injustice. And I like to take an issue, a setting, and weave a novel around it, always in the context of the law, because I'm still a lawyer, and that's the way I think, and I hope I always do. I hope I'm always fascinated by the law. I'm still very curious about it. But craft that book in such a way that it's still entertaining and people stay up all night to read it, and the pages turn. And in doing so, get people to think about an issue, get people to think about wrongful convictions or judicial elections for the first time, maybe. And those are the better books, the ones where I am able to take an issue and sort of flesh it out for my readers. Back here in the back.
Yeah, in the book, you mentioned that Debbie Carter's mom kind of resigned herself to the fact that Ron Williamson and Dennis Fritz were innocent, but the DA continued to think he was guilty. Since the book has come out, has the DA expressed any remorse or any acknowledgement that he was wrong?
Y'all hear that? Okay, you got it. Remorse would not, I don't think will ever happen with this guy. I interviewed him one time in June of 06, the June before the book came out, in his office, during the trial of the real killer. So across the street, they were trying the real killer 20-something years after the wrongful convictions of Dennis Fritz and Ron Williamson. He was still the DA, but he was not involved. He wasn't getting near it, okay? That was somebody else's problem. And I asked him during the interview on tape, now 20 years later, I said, do you think Ron Williamson and Dennis Fritz were involved in the murder of Debbie Carter? And he said no. And I think that's the first time he's ever admitted that. I don't know what he says now. He's got a website that just, rants and raves about everything. Check him out. Bill Peterson is his name. He's got a website. He sued me. He sued me and Dennis Fritz, the man he wrongfully convicted and put in prison for 11 years. Dennis wrote a book. I wrote a book. Another guy wrote a book. So he sued all three of us in October of 07. A year after the book came out, 1 year statute in Oklahoma. He waited a year and sued us. One of the cops sued us, and one of the fingerprint experts sued us. And those lawsuits have been dismissed, but they've appealed the dismissal, so they're still alive somewhere in the 10th Circuit. So, I mean, he's still, I'd say he's still feisty. He's still, he resigned from office for some, I forget what the reason was, and turned it over to his top assistant, who's also in the book. And I'm not sure what the guy's doing now. Obviously, we don't have much of a correspondence. Yes, sir.
Yes. What have been the reactions from other states to your book, specifically from state members of the bar or legislators?
Reactions from other states and members of the bar toward the innocent man?
Yeah.
Uniformly, it's been, you can't just, I don't think about it state by state. I think it's, 38 states have the death penalty, so it's not like this is regional. For the most part, the reaction has been positive. A sense of disbelief and a sense of outrage, a sense of, usually the letters are, kind of 50-50. And I don't see a lot of them because there are a lot of them, and I can't spend a lot of time reading a lot of mail if I want to write the next book. But generally, a sense that we got to change the system. We got that type of thinking. A lot of you must be kidding. Are you kidding me? Did you make this up? That type of letter. Just astonishment, disbelief. I'm still astonished by it. Yes, ma'am.
Did you always write and then just sort of get serious about it one day, or was it sort of out of blue eye, think I'll write a book?
I never thought about writing. I was going to be a professional athlete. Wasn't sure which sport. Didn't do football, basketball. I'd pick one of these days. But by the age of 12, it was becoming obvious that wasn't going to happen. Then my next dream was to be. I kind of drifted through college, high school, and college, and And then one day, just, like happens with a lot of guys my age when they're 20, we thought we were going to Vietnam. That we grew up in that era, and we were, working class, middle class kids, and the guy next door went to Vietnam. We just kind of lived under the fear of going off to Vietnam. So we didn't want to. Nobody wanted to do that. So you had to go to college to try to avoid Vietnam. And my parents were pushing hard for college, but I wasn't really serious about college for the first couple of years. And then about halfway through, though, when my grades really couldn't get any lower, and I was 20, and it was time to grow up, and the light bulb went off, and I said, okay, I'm going to study accounting, get a degree in accounting. I'm going to go to law school, and I'm going to make a bunch of money representing wealthy people who don't want to pay all their income taxes. For the life of me, I have no idea where that came from. I didn't know any tax lawyers. I didn't know any wealthy people. I didn't. It was just. I'm sure I read it somewhere. I'm sure I read it one day about a wealthy tax lawyer. And I said, okay, that's me. And so I went to law school at Ole Miss. Barely got in, because my grades were been punished for the first 2 years. And my second year in law school, I finally studied tax law. And I said, this is the last thing I want to do for the rest of my life. And at the same time, I got involved in the mock trial competitions, moot court, and I really, really enjoyed that. I got to where I would sneak off to. We were in the same town as the federal courthouse, so we had a county courthouse, a federal courthouse, and by my third year, I was watching the dockets and to see which lawyers were coming to town, and I'd go watch trials. I'd skip class and go watch trials, and even after practicing law for a few years, you know who the good lawyers are. You know who the good trial lawyers are, and there aren't many. There aren't many. Anywhere you go, there are very few. But when they get close by, I would try to go see them. And it was for that very reason that I was in a courtroom one day just kind of hanging around when I saw this trial, this terrible rape trial of a little girl that inspired me to write the first thing I'd ever written, and that was A Time to Kill. I had never thought about being a writer. I was a voracious reader. I had really good English teachers in high school, and I was lucky in that. But I never thought about writing. And I sat down one night with a legal pad, an old-fashioned yellow legal pad, and wrote the first page of what eventually became A Time to Kill. And when I finished the first chapter, it took a while to work up the courage to show it to my wife, who was an English lit major and reads all kinds of books. And I said, yeah, I want you to read this. And she said, what is it? I'm always, got some scheme going. And I said, it's a book I'm writing. She said, oh, I didn't know you were a writer. I said, well, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm. So I gave it to her, and I was so nervous. I went out and went for a long walk around the block. And when I came back, she'd finished the first chapter, and she said, "This is pretty rough stuff." And I said, "Yeah, it's based on a true story." And she said, "This is pretty good. This is pretty good." She said, "I'd like to read some more." I said, "Okay, I'll go write some more." So we started this chapter by chapter thing that went on for 3 years. 3 years. And I quit several times. By then I'd been practicing law for 5 years, and I was also a freshman member of the legislature in Mississippi, and my wife was having babies, and life was pretty crazy. I didn't have any time to write. And so I got into this ridiculous routine of going to the office at 5 o'clock in the morning and writing for a couple of hours. And I'd get frustrated and ask myself, what are you doing? I've never done this before. What makes you think you can write? I used to walk in bookstores and see all the thousands of books, and I would think, God, who wants to hear from me? What have I got to say? And had it not been for Renee, kicking me in the butt every now and then to get the book finished, I'm not sure I would have. A Time to Kill was published 2 20 years ago, June of 1989, they printed by an unknown publisher that soon went out of business. They printed 5,000 hardback copies of A Time to Kill, and I bought 1,000 of those. It's a great story. My publisher, I was broke, but not nearly as broke as my publisher, and they had no money for promotion. And we didn't have a good bookstore in our small town, but we had a nice little library. So I concocted this scheme of having a big book party. I'd buy 1,000 copies at wholesale for like $10, sell them at retail, $20, invite the whole town to come to my party, and all my friends would show up and, buy my book, and I'd make a little money, retail and royalties and whatever, and, try to sell some books. We had a huge party. A lot of people showed up. And when the party was over, I still owned 882 copies of A Time to Kill. 35 libraries later, I finally sold them all. I took the last 100 books and buried them in the backyard. But that experience was, it was fun. It was not rewarding. And I said to myself, okay, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to write one more book. I don't like going to the office at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's taking way too much time. Who am I kidding? I got lucky and got the first one published. I'm going to write one more book, and I'm going to make it as blatantly commercial as I can. I'm going to throw in everything but sex, because my mother would kill me. But it's going to be, something that is just, a page turner. And if that doesn't work, forget it. I'll go be a lawyer for the rest of my life. That's what I had planned anyway. And the firm came out in March of '91, and everything changed overnight. I mean, it became a bestseller right off the bat, and I was suddenly bored with the law and bored with politics and bored with a lot of things, and I had this dream of writing full time suddenly came true. And for the first few years, I was really nervous about going back to the law office, going back to my little office and hanging out the shingle again. And I said, okay, I don't really want to do that. And I looked around and I watched the bestseller list, and because I still read most of the books on it, and I realized that the big writers, the ones who sell, come out every year. And I'm still trying. I'm still doing every year. That was a long answer. I forgot what the question was. Yes, sir. The street lawyer, the background story. Almost every book I've written, I can take you back to something that really happened. Almost every one. With The Associate, though, the book I published last month, there's nothing really, there was no inspiration. Well, I didn't mean it like that. It's a great book. I just mean I grew up in small towns in the Deep South, and when the books started being published, I started going to New York, and with the Pelican Brief in 1992, I did my first and only National Authors Tour, where they send you to 35 cities in 35 days, and everybody's supposed to be having fun. So I got to see a lot of big cities, just kind of, blitzing through them. So I was finally exposed to big cities, and they're fun to visit, and they're fun to leave behind. I really belong out in the country. I was in New York, one of my first trips to New York, and I had a confrontation on the sidewalk on Fifth Avenue with a homeless man. And I'm sure the typical New Yorker would know how to handle that situation. But whatever I did, I didn't handle it right. And words were exchanged, and he followed me for a while, and it was very unpleasant. I finally got away from him. I circled back, and he was back at his post, begging for money, and life was okay. And for the first time in my life, In small towns in the deep South, you don't have homeless people. I don't know where they are. I mean, I don't know what they call them, or hobos or whatever, or maybe somebody. I never saw anybody homeless people. And there, for the first time, I noticed a homeless person, and I began thinking, where does he go tonight? Well, how does he survive? Well, who feeds him? And so that was the inspiration for the book. And in the first chapter, you have the real encounter between a young lawyer and a homeless guy. So that was the inspiration for Street Lawyer. I started that book. I shouldn't tell this story. It's one of my thinner books because I was way behind schedule. I'd written 100 pages of this brilliant novel, and my wife finally read the first 100 pages, and she said, "This is the worst stuff you've ever written." I said, "No, it's brilliant." So I sent it to my editor in New York, and he said, "This stuff really stinks, John. I know you could write so bad. I didn't know you had a bad book in you." So I said, "Okay, you win." But the deadline was like 2 months away, and so I went into the room and locked the door and didn't come out for 2 months and wrote The Street Lawyer, which I think is one of the better books. It's one of the books that really had an impact something that I could see an impact around the country from contributions to homeless shelters and things like that. Stuff you could quantify and stories I would hear, wonderful letters I received from people who work with the homeless who saw a spike in donations for a brief period of time. Yes, sir.
Would you describe your average day of writing? Does it still begin at 5 a.m.?
No. Rarely. It goes something like this. The last book came out the last Tuesday in January, and the next book will come out the last Tuesday in January of 2010, a year from now. And we always have a little ritual in New York when I publish. I go out and have dinner with my publisher and my agent, and we pick the date for next year. To do that, I've got to turn in a really good first draft, which is between 400 and 500 pages, around October the 1st, because the editing and the revisions take about 6 weeks, and it's an extensive process that involves a couple of people who, over the years, have learned that they can say anything. Some writers will turn something in and say, "Don't touch it," and they can get by with it. Some people can't. I'm way too insecure for that. I want to be edited. I want these people to have a shot at the book. That's about 6 weeks. To finish by October the 1st, I have a little rules that keep me going, and that is that on April the 1st of each year, I'm going to write the first word of the first novel. And I'll write a page or two a day through April, May, and really in the summertime, June, July, 3 or 4 or 5 pages a day. August and September are as rough as they have to be, depending on where I am in the book. Usually September is not 5 o'clock in the morning, but 6 is not unusual. 6 to noon. And when you write almost nonstop for 5 or 6 hours, you got to go, you're brain dead. You got to go do something physical. I write the same place. I have an office behind, in a separate building behind our house. It's the same computer now for 15 years, and it's about to go. And I'm really nervous. I mean, the keyboard's sticking, and it's just making all kinds of noises. And if it goes, I'm not sure what's going to happen. One of my New Year's resolutions for about the 4th year in a row is to get a new computer. So I'm going through that process right now. Same machine, same type of coffee, same mug, same everything. The office has no phones, faxes, internet. I'm not plugged in over there. I am in the house, but and sometimes I'll cover the windows. I love a rainy day when I'm writing because I'm not tempted to go outside. And so, I mean, I can do a lot of work in a short period of time. I didn't write a word today. Didn't think about it. I haven't written. I'm always taking notes. Bernie Madoff, Mark Dreyer, Alan Stanford, all you got. clipping stuff out of newspapers, all the stuff you see, but I haven't done any serious writing in 2 or 3 months. So it's a part-time job. Yes, sir.
After so many successful books, do you miss your law practice?
Do I miss the law practice? No, sir. I'll tell you, I don't. I never got a whole lot of. I wouldn't recommend anybody to do what I did, to go back to just to start from scratch. First of all, you're not qualified. I mean, to allow a rookie lawyer to start filing lawsuits and defending murderers ought to be against the law. I mean, there needs to be some internship somewhere to train you, and there was none of that back then. And then what I really didn't like about it was the monthly tension of paying the bills. And you go to any small town, and there are a lot of lawyers. You go to any big city. I mean, there's a lot of us, okay? And I just never really I settled a big case one time. It was a railroad case in 1985. I'd been in law school for 4 years. I tried the case in front of a jury in federal court in Oxford, Mississippi. And I took the case. I got it on my own. I took it to trial. I worked it up and took it almost to the jury. And I turned down offers to settle and finally was able to scare the railroad into paying us a lot of money. And it was a great victory. My client was thrilled. And it took, a month out of my life where I didn't sleep very much. And I remember thinking, I wanted to be a big-time trial lawyer. That wasn't any fun. I was 30 years old. I never had any fun in a courtroom. I've heard lawyers say that they love the thrill of the courtroom. Well, I kept hearing them say that. But when I was in the courtroom, a lawyer in a courtroom has 10 different things on his mind. What he's doing, what he's listening to, what he's preparing to ask the witness, whatever, what motions are coming up, evidentiary issues, and then 1,000 ancillary things. Are your witnesses out in the hallway? Blah, blah, blah. You got a million things on your mind. I'd never really enjoyed, even when I was winning that one big case, it just wasn't any fun. Spending the money was fun, and it was gone in no time. But I didn't really, at the same time, about halfway through that very brief career as a lawyer, I started writing A Time to Kill. And once I was bitten by that bug, nothing else in life was going to be worthwhile. I didn't know if it was going to happen. So, no, I don't miss it. I do miss some of the lawyers. My best friends are still lawyers. Some from my hometown. I miss the camaraderie of the courthouse and the judges and the stories, the wonderful stories you hear. I miss some of that, but I never miss the practice of law. You had a question.
Yes, 2 quick questions. Would you ever consider re-entering politics? And I know you're an avid baseball fan. What is your reaction to the A-Rod?
Politics and A-Rod. No, I twice, once in Mississippi, where we lived 15 years ago, and now in Virginia, where we live now. My name has popped up as a potential candidate for the U.S. Senate. I have no idea where that came from. I'm not behind it. I wouldn't take a Senate seat if you gave it to me and promised me no opposition for 20 years. I wouldn't have it. It's not those are not good jobs. Listen, I know some guys. I don't have any close friends in the U.S. Senate, but I know some of those guys pretty well, and it's a very prestigious club. They love the power and prestige. It is one crappy job, okay? You can't get anything done. They're really frustrated by it. So, no, I love to kind of cheer from the sidelines, do fundraisers for people I believe in and that. But that's as far as I'm going to. I'm really tired of that, too. The last 2 years I took a lot of energy out of a lot of people. Baseball, A-Rod. Well, I never have liked the Yankees. I just got to be honest with you. Well, no, I'm not going to bash the Yankees. I grew up a Cardinal fan, and you can't be one or the other. So I have a lot of really strong opinions about the Yankees, the Steinbrenners, what they've done to baseball, Scott Boras, A-Rod, all of Scott Boras' clients, the teams they've wrecked, on and on and on. But I'm not going to say it on the record, okay? Because some very strong opinions. Yes, sir.
What is your favorite book?
My favorite book of mine?
That you've written and that someone else has written.
Someone else has written. Yeah, it's tough to say. I had to do a list at the end of last year for one of the gossip magazines. I don't know how this got through, but they asked me to name my all-time favorite top 5 books, and I can't remember exactly what I put on the list because I have a lot of favorites. The Grapes of Wrath has always been a favorite. I love In Cold Blood. I read it twice when I was trying to write The Innocent Man, true crime. I love Mark Twain. I just finished a Mark Twain binge last year, reading a lot of his books and a couple of biographies, and so I'm kind of all over the place. My favorite contemporary writer is John le Carré, the British espionage guy who's just a wonderful writer. I read the other lawyers to kind of watch what they're doing. Scott Turo's a buddy. We tell lawyer jokes all the time. David Baldacci and Steve Martini, those guys. I've read a fair amount of popular fiction. So it's a non-answer to your question because it's hard for me to say what's my favorite. I don't guess I have one favorite all-time book. Of my books, 2 or 3 come to mind. It's with the benefit of 22 books into this career now. I can look back with some measure of maturity and hindsight and think, some books are better than others. A Time to Kill is always kind of a sentimental favorite because it was the first thing I ever wrote, and it was the first book I have written without a deadline. The firm kind of had a self-imposed deadline. I'd promised it in New York, so I had to get it finished by a certain day. But I didn't know if I was going to finish A Time to Kill. The manuscript was 900 pages long. We had to cut out 400 pages. There was so much crap in it. I put everything in there. Everything I wanted to write about, I put in A Time to Kill. And that probably made it better, but it also slowed it down. I couldn't write that way now. I've tried. I really like A Painted House, because it's a childhood memoir. It's very autobiographical up to a point, and it's about my parents and grandparents, and there are no lawyers in it, a lot of baseball. And then The Innocent Man is a book that I simply cannot let go of. I tend to forget these books real fast. I am continually embarrassed when somebody says, in The Partner, why did Nathan do this or that? And I always say, who is Nathan? That was 11 books ago. I can't remember all this stuff. But the Innocent Man, I guess it's because I'm doing a lot of innocence work now and traveling around the country. And if you get a chance to go to an Innocence Project fundraiser where they're going to have exonerees there telling their stories, it's a neat experience. It'll break your heart. It'll make you very angry. And if you care about the law, it'll probably motivate you to do something. So those 3 books. Yes, ma'am.
I enjoyed reading The Runaway Jury. And when the movie came out, I was a bit disappointed that they replaced the tobacco industry with the gun industry. So my question is, to what extent is your input considered when your books are turned into movies?
Question is, Runaway Jury, in the novel, the bad guys are the tobacco industry. In the movie, it was the gun industry. Why the change, and how much influence do I have over the movies? After the book was published, there were some significant changes in tobacco litigation around the country, and that kind of worried some of the lawyers who were involved with whoever the production company was. I can't remember. And we had a hard time getting the movie made. This is what happens in Hollywood. With Runaway Jury, we had the director, we had a cast with pay-or-play contracts, which means if you don't make the movie, you're going to pay them anyway. The cast included Sean Connery was the bad guy, Ed Norton, Gwyneth Paltrow, and somebody else. They were on the set. They had built sets in Biloxi, Mississippi to film the movie. The money was committed, and the script was done, and they were about a week away from principal photography. 8 years later, they filmed the movie. That's what can go wrong. So when people ask me, are they going to do the movie? You believe it when they start shooting, because at that point, the serious money has hit the ground. But up until that point, you never believe it's going to be a movie, because a lot of things can go wrong. I have been very lucky with Hollywood. I've had, I think, 8 or 9 books adapted. They've all been fun to watch, with the exception of one. The Chamber was a train wreck from day one and got worse when they filmed it. And nobody went to see it. I'm glad nobody went to see it because it was so bad. But listen, only one bad movie out of 9 is pretty good. I don't get involved in them. The last 2 movies that were filmed, Runaway Jury and Skipping Christmas, I never went to the set. I wanted to, tried to go, things, whatever, I think I was writing. They filmed Skipping Christmas in L.A. in July using fake snow, and I kind of wanted to go see that, but I never could. They scoop it up at night, put it in the warehouse, and it snows again the next day. I want to see that part of it, but I don't hang out on the set. By the time I sold the film rights to the associate. We sold the film rights 2 months ago to somebody we know, somebody we've dealt with in the past, and somebody we know, like, trust, and nice people. And there are a lot of nice people out there. He has an idea. This producer has an idea for the screenwriter, an idea for the director, and an idea for the story. And I said, okay, good, let's do it. And we try to deal with good people. Sometimes I'll pick out I have the right to approve a screenwriter, so I'll look at his other movies and say yes or no. But that's it. It's best to stay out of. I don't know how to make movies. I don't want to learn. It's another world. I know what I do best: stay at home on the farm and write the next book. But they're all for sale. We have. Listen, are you kidding? Stephen King told me one time. He said, "Look, I was griping about the movies or something," and he said, "Look, when it comes to Hollywood, there are 2 groups of writers. The first group consists of those who do not sell to Hollywood for whatever reason. You're not going to touch my stuff; it's sacred. That's a very small group. The second group consists of those of us who do. And if you join the second group, there are a few rules. Get all your money up front, kiss it goodbye, and expect it to be something different. If you don't like that, go join the first group." And it's made my life a whole lot easier. They don't really change the books. The movies are on at the local cinema for a month and they're gone, on DVD. It's somebody else's interpretation, so I've tried to enjoy it. Yes, ma'am. Will The Innocent Man become a movie? We sold the film rights right when the book was published, and to Smokehouse Productions, which is George Clooney's company. They were sort of getting the book off the ground in development when the lawsuits were filed. And the attorneys for the production company have taken a very, very safe position, saying, we're not going to go forward until the litigation is taken care of. So it's really, I can't say it slowed it down that much. It doesn't take much to slow down one of these projects. But right now, the official reason is that the litigation. I think it'll be a movie. There's a contract. If they don't start filming in 3 years, I get all the rights back. That's pretty typical. So I think so. But at this point, it's not really in active production. Playing for Pizza is in active production right now. It's with a screenwriter. And 2 or 3 of the others are somewhere, going down that road. Again, you don't believe it until they start filming. One more question. Yes, ma'am. Wait a minute. The question is, you have these elite lawyers who are at the top of their game, and they give it all up and go do what?
Just go to an island and go fishing. In the plot,
Oh, escapism. It's a recurring theme. I wasn't real happy as a lawyer. I kept thinking about, okay, how can I get out of here? How can I get? So a lot of times they kind of ride off in the sunset or go to the islands. Or surprised you noticed that. I don't like the endings to be predictable. I get really irritated when people say, "Oh, it's a formula. I read 100 pages and I had the whole book figured out." And I just don't believe people are that smart. And so I always try to have a twist at the end. And some of the books have some really wicked twists. The most wretched, vicious, vile hate mail I've received has been over the partner, the ending. And the book's out in paperback, so it's still out there, which means the letters are still coming in. I published the book 10 years ago, and they're still writing dirty letters. So I try not to be predictable, but I've gotten away from a lot of the escapism. So now, when the lawyer's at the top of his game, and he's a great lawyer in a big firm, big money, and I need to get rid of him, I just kill him off. Thank y'all.
Thank you on behalf of the Georgetown Law Innocence Project, and this is a picture of the Law Center. It's been signed by our members.
Thank you. Good job.
And we'd like to invite everyone to join us for a reception over at the Sport and Fitness Lobby, which is over in Hotong. Thank you.
Go. Am I following you?
Yeah.